My name is Margaret Collins. I am 67 years old. I spent 38 years working as an accountant. Numbers were honest. People, not always. Last July 15th, on my 67th birthday, my children surprised me with nearly $4,000 worth of gifts. A brand new leather recliner, the newest smartphone, an expensive espresso machine, a smartwatch I never asked for. 3 days later, I returned every single one of them. My son didn't call me for almost a month. My daughter told my sister I had become impossible to please. Even my oldest grandson asked his mother, "Why would Grandma give everything back?" It was a good question. The only problem was, no one asked me. For years, my birthday had followed the same schedule. My daughter Emily always arrived first with her husband and their 2 boys. 20 minutes later, my son Michael came, carrying the biggest gift in the room. Every year, it was something larger, more expensive, more impressive. Almost like they were competing without saying it out loud. The funny thing is, when I was raising them, birthdays looked very different. A homemade cake, a handwritten card, sometimes wildflowers picked from the side of the road. Back then, nobody worried about the price tag. Now the wrapping paper cost more than my first birthday dress. This past July was no different. Emily hugged me before she even sat down. "Happy birthday, Mom. You're going to love this." Michael smiled. I think I finally found something worthy of replacing that old chair. The grandchildren sang, we cut the cake, we laughed. Someone took pictures for Facebook. For a little while, my house felt alive again. Then the conversation slowly changed. Emily checked her phone. We promised we'd stop by Jason's parents before 6. Michael looked at his watch. "I've got an early meeting tomorrow." My youngest grandson was still building a card tower on the coffee table when his mother gently took his hand. "Come on, sweetheart." He looked at me. "Can I stay another hour?" Emily smiled awkwardly. "Maybe next time." The front door closed, and just like that, my birthday was over. Not because the candles had burned out, because everyone had already left. I stood alone in the kitchen, putting untouched slices of cake into small plastic containers. The silence arrived exactly the way it always did. Quiet, patient, almost familiar. I looked across the living room. The new recliner still had its price tag hanging from the side. The espresso machine sat unopened on the counter. The phone was still inside its box. Beautiful gifts, thoughtful gifts, expensive gifts. But something about them felt unfinished. On the morning of July 18th, I loaded every single one into the trunk of my old Subaru. The young woman at the customer service counter smiled politely. Was there something wrong with them? "No," I answered. "They're perfect." She frowned slightly. "Then why are you returning everything?" I smiled. "I simply don't need any of it." That wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for a stranger. 3 refunds, 3 receipts, and 1 decision. By that evening, my daughter called. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask whether something had happened. Her first question was simple. "Mom, why did the furniture store call me?" I poured myself a cup of tea before answering. "They refunded your payment." A long silence. "You actually returned it?" "Yes." But why? It didn't belong in my house. She sighed. Mom, Michael and I spent weeks picking those gifts. I know. They were expensive. I know that too. Another pause. Then she said something that stayed with me. I don't understand you anymore. Neither of us raised our voices. We simply ended the call. An hour later, my son called. Unlike Emily, he didn't try to hide his frustration. Mom, what are you doing? What do you mean? You embarrassed us. I embarrassed you? The store manager called because the refund went back to my credit card. I know. You could have at least asked first. I looked around my quiet kitchen. The calendar still showed July 15th. I hadn't turned the page yet. For what? So we could exchange them. I didn't want to exchange them. You didn't even open the boxes. No. Michael let out a tired laugh. I honestly don't know what you expect from us anymore. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. That table had seen homework, tax returns, birthday cakes, Christmas dinners, and more conversations than I could count. Old habits never leave accountants. I reached for a small notebook. For nearly 40 years, I had balanced ledgers. Now, without thinking, I began making another list. July 15th. Family arrived, 2:05 p.m. Cake, 2:30. Photos, 2:48. Emily checked her phone, 3:07. Michael answered a work email during coffee, 3:12. Grandchildren left, 3:24. Front door closed, 3:27. Time spent together, 1 hour and 22 minutes. I stared at that number longer than I should have. Then I turned back a few pages. Last birthday, 1 hour and 31 minutes. The year before, 1 hour and 18 minutes. 5 years ago, almost 2 hours. I wasn't comparing gifts, I was comparing time. And every year, as the gifts became more expensive, the visits became shorter. The next morning, my sister Linda stopped by unexpectedly. She had heard everything. I have to ask, she said carefully, why would you send back gifts that most people could never afford? I smiled. Sit down first. She looked at me across the kitchen table. You've always been the practical one, Margaret. I suppose I have. So tell me. I stirred my tea slowly. Linda, have you ever noticed that nobody visits me unless there's a birthday, Mother's Day, or Christmas? She didn't answer because she had. They're busy, she finally said. I know. They love you. I know. They're doing their best. I nodded. I believe that. She frowned. Then why return the gifts? I looked toward the empty living room where the old armchair still stood by the window. I wasn't returning the gifts. She blinked. I was returning the excuse. Linda looked at me without saying a word. For the first time since July 15th, someone had stopped trying to defend my children and simply listened. Linda left just before sunset. Her words stayed behind. Maybe you're expecting something they don't even realize you're missing. Perhaps she was right. Or perhaps I had spent too many years pretending I didn't notice. The following Saturday, Emily invited me to lunch, not at my house, at a restaurant halfway between our homes. She was already waiting when I arrived. I wanted to talk, she said. So did I. For a while we discussed ordinary things, the weather, her boys, my tomato plants. Neither of us mentioned the birthday. Finally, she folded her hands on the table. Mom, are you angry with us? No. Then why does it feel like you're punishing us? I looked at my daughter, 42 years old, successful, kind, always in a hurry. I've never wanted to punish you. Then help me understand. I smiled sadly. Emily, when was the last time you came to my house without bringing a gift? She thought for a moment. I don't know. When was the last time you came with nothing planned afterward? She looked down. I don't remember. When was the last time we drank a cup of coffee without someone checking the time? She didn't answer. Our lunch arrived. Neither of us touched it for a while. Then she quietly said, Life gets busy, Mom. I know. You remember what it was like. I do. But it's different now. I nodded. Yes, it is. She seemed relieved, thinking I agreed with her. But I wasn't talking about schedules. I was talking about priorities. Before we left, she hugged me, longer than usual. I'll call you next week. I'd like that. She did call, 14 days later. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. A week after that, Michael stopped by unexpectedly. I almost didn't recognize the sound of his truck in the driveway. He walked inside carrying a small cardboard box. I found this while cleaning the garage. Inside were dozens of old photo albums. My husband Robert had labeled every one by year. Michael smiled. Thought you might want them. I ran my hand across the faded covers. I do. He glanced at his watch. I can't stay long. Of course. There it was again. Not the words, the clock. Always the clock. As he reached the front door, I asked, Michael, do you remember your 10th birthday? He laughed. Barely. You got a red bicycle. His face brightened. Dad spent weeks fixing it. He bought it second-hand, I said. We couldn't afford a new one. Michael smiled. I never knew that. You didn't need to. He nodded. Then he looked around the house. You really don't miss that new chair? No. The phone? No. The coffee machine? I shook my head. What I miss isn't sold in stores. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. He stood there for a moment as if he wanted to say something else. Instead, he checked his watch one more time. I should get going. I know. After he drove away, I carried the photo albums to the dining table. One picture slipped onto the floor. It was my 35th birthday. A homemade cake, 3 balloons, Emily missing her front tooth, Michael covered in chocolate frosting, Robert holding an old camera with one hand and my shoulder with the other. On the back, in Robert's handwriting, were 6 simple words. Best birthdays cost the least to remember. I sat there smiling. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to buy anything with the refund money, not yet. Instead, I was going to wait, because I needed to know something. If there were no birthdays, no holidays, no expensive presents, would my children still find their way to my front door? That answer was worth far more than $4,000. August passed quietly. No birthdays, no holidays, no family dinners, just ordinary Tuesdays and slow Sunday mornings. For the first week, I kept telling myself everyone was simply busy. By the second week, I stopped making excuses. Then something unexpected happened. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, I drove to the public library to return a novel I'd finished the night before. Near the children's section, I noticed 3 old reading chairs. The fabric was worn. One armrest had been repaired with gray tape. A little boy was sitting on the floor because all the chairs were occupied. The librarian recognized me. "Margaret," she smiled, "haven't seen you in a while." "I've been reading at home," she laughed. "We could use someone like you again." "Again?" "You remember how you used to help children with math after you retired?" I had almost forgotten. For nearly 5 years after leaving my accounting job, I volunteered every Wednesday afternoon, helping children who struggled with numbers. Not because I loved mathematics, because I loved watching fear disappear from a child's face when something finally made sense. The librarian sighed. We had to stop the program. No funding. I looked around. The room hadn't changed much. The books were older, the shelves were fuller, but the children were exactly the same. Curious, noisy, hopeful. "How much would it cost to start again?" I asked. She looked surprised. "I honestly don't know." "Find out." The next morning she called. We made a list. She sounded almost embarrassed. New tables, chairs, school supplies, a small reading corner, around $3,500. $3,500. Almost exactly what my children had spent on my birthday gifts. I thanked her and said I'd think about it. That evening, I opened the envelope containing the refund receipts. I placed them beside my old calculator. 38 years as an accountant had taught me one thing. Money is never just numbers. It tells a story about what people value. I wrote one check, then another. By Monday afternoon, the library had enough to reopen the children's learning room before the school year began. I asked for one favor: no announcements, no ceremony, no newspaper. The librarian smiled. "I know you too well." 2 weeks later, my oldest grandson, Ethan, called unexpectedly. "Grandma?" "Hello, sweetheart." "Mom said you're upset with everyone." I smiled. "Did she?" "She said you've been acting different." "Do you think I have?" He hesitated. "I don't know." Children are wonderfully honest. "I just miss coming over." My heart tightened. "So why don't you?" There was another silence. Then he quietly answered, "Mom and Dad are always busy." Not I am busy, they are. A 13-year-old had just told me more truth in one sentence than the adults had in 2 months. Before hanging up, he asked, "Can I come help you in the garden before school starts?" I smiled for the first time in days. I'd like that very much. After the call ended, I looked out the kitchen window. For the first time since my birthday, I wasn't thinking about the gifts. I was thinking about time. Maybe children didn't need expensive presents to remember you. Maybe they only needed someone who was never looking at a watch. I just hoped their parents would realize that before another birthday came and went. The Saturday before school started, Ethan arrived at 9 o'clock with a pair of gardening gloves that were clearly too big for him. "I brought my own," he said proudly. I laughed. "You came prepared." For 3 hours we pulled weeds, picked tomatoes, and repaired the small wooden fence around my vegetable garden. Not once did he look at a phone. Not once did he ask when we were finished. Around noon, we sat on the back porch with lemonade. He looked across the yard and smiled. I like it here. So do I. A few minutes later, he asked a question I wasn't expecting. Grandma, are you really mad at Mom and Dad? I shook my head. No. Then why did you give their presents back? I looked at him for a long moment, because unlike the adults, he had actually asked. I'll tell you, I said, but only because you wanted the answer. He nodded. When your grandfather was alive, birthdays lasted all day. We didn't have expensive presents. Some years we barely had enough money for a nice dinner. But nobody watched the clock. We sat together. We talked. We played cards. Sometimes we didn't do anything at all. And those are the birthdays I remember. Ethan listened without interrupting. I returned the gifts because I realized something. What? Every year the presents became more expensive, and every year the visit became shorter. He looked down at his glass. I never noticed. I know. Most people don't. He thought quietly for a moment before saying, I think Mom and Dad believe buying nice things makes you happy. I'm sure they do. But does it? I smiled. It makes me grateful. But it doesn't make me less lonely. Those words stayed between us. No tears, no dramatic silence, just honesty. The following Wednesday, the library reopened its children's learning room. I arrived early, hoping no one would recognize me. Of course, the librarian ruined that plan. She introduced me to the children as the volunteer who helped make today possible. I almost corrected her. I hadn't made it possible. My children had. They just didn't know it. That afternoon, Ethan walked in with his mother. Emily stopped in the doorway. She looked around the room. The new tables, the reading corner, the fresh shelves. A small plaque stood beside the entrance. This learning room was made possible through the kindness of a member of our community. No name, just those words. Emily looked at me. Mom. The librarian smiled. Your mother didn't want anyone to know. Emily's eyes slowly filled with tears. You used the birthday money. I nodded. Every dollar. She looked around again. Children were reading, laughing, learning. One little girl was solving multiplication problems with colored blocks. Emily whispered, You gave all of it away? I gently shook my head. No. I traded things for time. She frowned. I don't understand. I looked toward Ethan, who was helping a younger boy with a puzzle. I wanted something that would still matter after the boxes were gone. For the first time in months, Emily didn't try to answer. She simply stood beside me, and together we watched the children laugh. Emily didn't say much on the drive back to my house. She offered to take me home. For the first time in a long while, we weren't in a hurry. When we pulled into my driveway, she turned off the engine but didn't reach for the door. Mom, I owe you an apology. I looked at her. She was staring at the steering wheel, just as she used to when she was a little girl, trying to admit she'd broken something. I thought returning the gifts meant you didn't appreciate us. It wasn't about appreciation. I know that now. She took a slow breath. I think, We kept trying to buy moments we should have been living. Neither of us spoke for a while. Some silences heal. This was one of them. The following Sunday, my doorbell rang at 10 in the morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Michael was standing there. No gift bag, no wrapped box, no balloons. Just a paper bag from the bakery down the street. "I brought cinnamon rolls," he said. "I remembered they're your favorite." I smiled. "Come in." He looked almost uncomfortable. "I don't have anywhere else to be today." Those 7 words meant more to me than every birthday present I'd received in the last 10 years. We made coffee, not with an expensive espresso machine, with the old coffee maker I'd owned for nearly 15 years. It worked just fine. For 4 hours we talked about his work, about his children, about Robert, about the old camping trips we'd almost forgotten. Not once did Michael look at his watch. Before leaving, he stopped in the hallway. "I'm sorry, Mom. I thought providing things was the same as being present." I hugged him. "You weren't a bad son. You were just a busy one." 2 weeks later, Emily called, not to tell me she was coming, to ask, "Are you home?" "I am." "Good. We're bringing sandwiches." That afternoon, the grandchildren filled my backyard with laughter. No birthday, no holiday, no special occasion, just an ordinary Saturday. It turned out ordinary days were the ones I'd miss the most. A few months later, Ethan handed me a birthday card he'd made at school. Inside, there wasn't a gift certificate. There wasn't money. There wasn't even a store-bought card. He had written only one sentence. "Next year, can I spend my whole birthday with you instead of buying something?" I read it twice. Then I folded the card carefully and placed it inside the family photo album. Some gifts don't belong on shelves. They belong in your heart. I'm 67 years old. I spent most of my life balancing numbers. It took retirement to teach me that the most valuable things can never be counted. Time, attention, a quiet afternoon, a conversation without anyone checking the clock. My children thought I returned their birthday gifts because I didn't want them. The truth was, I was making room for something I'd been missing for years. Not expensive presents, my family. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't something you buy. It's choosing not to be in a hurry.